So today we're going to go through an article from Politico, and this exemplifies what I have been saying for the longest time on this channel, especially when it comes to criticisms of the anti-Eurosceptics from Europe. They are not the same. All these nationalistic far-right groups, completely different. There's always something different at their core. Even if they sound the same, they can't even agree on just basic stuff. And what will end up happening is they'll just sideline themselves. And people will realise, as I said, look, they're not worth voting for. Voting for these parties won't get anything done. It's a waste of your vote. Even if you do it as just a protest vote. You know, and we've been through this before in the UK. Look at the BNP. Now, they never got any MPs, but they did get council seats, and it was very much viewed as a protest vote. And look how fast these BNP guys got in, and then basically were thrown out because they were basically saying abjectly racist things when people have been saying that since the beginning. Look, these guys are racist. Even though people in the Daily Mail, like John Little, tried to defend them and say they're not as racist as you think, and then turn around and say, oh, I would vote for the BNP, but I don't know, they're a bit too racist for me now. So, this is from Politico by a guy called Dennis McShane, and it's Bannon's Mission Impossible: Unite the European Right. So it's fashionable in Europe today to depict the rise of a nationalist populist anti-EU right inspired by Donald Trump's unstoppable, inspired by Donald Trump as unstoppable, with former Trump strategist Steve Bannon playing the role of Svengali. But Bannon and his sidekicks have a problem. The Trump vision may dovetail with the Anglosphere ideology of Brexiteers who favour amputation from Europe, but it's not where European politics actually is. So, in fact, the rise of the populist, illiberal, xenophobic and anti-elite parties is nothing new in Europe. Where some of them have won up to 25% in the national votes, going further back between 1945 and 1980, the French and Italian communist parties opposed Brussels and wanted to shut down foreigners shut down frontiers to foreign workers. Sound familiar? And this is coming from the French and Italian Communist Party. So, next May's election in the European Parliament, via a single-round proportional representational vote that favours fringe groups, will inevitably be a happy hunting ground for populists on the left and the right. But if the European Parliament fills up with parties based on national identity or single-issue politics, it will just regulate itself to the sidelines. Today's anti-immigrant, anti-EU populists have far more differences than what they have in common. The best known is Marine Le Pen, but her party has lost 60% of its members. I didn't know this, but that's quite an interesting statistic. 60% of its members since the 2017 French presidential election, down from 83,000 to 31,000, just like Nigel Farage in the UK. She has managed in the past to win publicity and European Parliament seats, but voters have no interest in giving her or Farage having any real power. Austria's Chancellor Sebastian Kurz announced a new Vienna-Rome axis after a coalition of the populist Five Stars and the far-right League took power in Italy earlier this year. For the League under Matteo Salvini, this means Austria would open its borders to take in refugees waiting in camps in Italy. For Kurz, this meant that Italy would stop refugees to reach the Alps. The axis lasted 2 weeks. The Australian and Italian right basically discovering they could agree on almost nothing. Brexit is another major warning that taking anti-EU demagoguery to its logical end, the leaving of Europe, only makes national politics far more difficult. Hungary's Viktor Orban and Poland's, I have no idea how you pronounce his name, Jarosław Kaczynski? I have no idea how you pronounce that name. And Bulgaria's Bolvo Boronski and the Czech Republic's Andrej Babis depend on transfers of up to 4% of GDP from EU coffers on exporting their unemployed across the continent thanks to freedom of movement, and on attracting massive foreign direct investment by their membership of the European Union. Trump and Bannon, on the other hand, have attacked the EU as the foe. They welcome Brexit and shower praise on Leave campaigners like Farage and Boris. Trump has made little secret of wanting to deal with the Russian President Vladimir Putin over the heads of Europe and has criticised NATO, even hinting that a US withdrawal from the defensive pact. Despite the iration of the sometimes caused Brussels, European illiberals like Orban, Kaczynski, Borisov and Babis do not advocate leaving the EU, and other than Orban and Salvini, they see Putin as an enemy and are also pro-NATO. Trump wants to build a wall against free movement from Mexico, while Poland allows 1 million Ukrainians into Poland as cheap labour. And all the populist right-wing governments want to guarantee EU rules on freedom of movement in order to export their unemployed. Now, Brexiteers, I want to reiterate that, Brexiteers constantly say, oh, there are loads of countries that want to leave the EU. No, they don't. The EU is massively beneficial, as we are about to find out how beneficial it is. You've got the reports that should have, I think the first lot should have been come out, and it's going to be branded as Project Fear. You had a guy literally in the food industry saying how difficult it would be to now get ingredients to put in his sandwiches. You then had a conservative, very pro-Brexiteer versus one that wasn't so pro-Brexit, and the pro-Brexiteer was basically an idiot, basically saying that what this expert who had been working in the field for over 35 years was fear-mongering. And it was just absolutely unbelievable to say, but unbelievable to see. But there you have it. That's as it says here, leaving the EU and all this Brexiteer stuff that they send is nothing to do with actual policies or politics. It's all ideological. So Trump and his supporters are also anti-Muslim and strongly pro-Jewish, whereas despite the anti-Muslim rhetoric from Budapest and Warsaw, both Orban and Kaczynski support the entry of two Muslim nations, Albania and Kosovo, into the EU. Orban also ran a barely disguised anti-Semitic campaign against George Soros, and Bård Sundner, who represents the right-wing Swedish Democrats in the Swedish Parliament, said that Jews are not Swedish. As you can see, these groups don't agree on anything. So the idea that that Bannon is going to unite these groups is completely falsifiable. And anyone thinking that there can be this right-wing coalition rise in Europe is completely false, because when even the current parties in like Austria and Italy, who have far-right people in power, can't even agree. And again, that alliance lasted 2 weeks, and they had to split because they couldn't agree on anything. Most of these people who are in these right-wing factions do this because they are nationalists, and they cannot see the fact that the world has moved beyond the idea of a single nationhood, is becoming obsolete, and that countries working together in even closer partnership is the way forward. So Now we get on to Trump's economic policies. So Trump's economic policy is based on low taxes on the rich and cuts to social security and reductions in state-funded healthcare for the middle classes. The European populists are welfareists who increase spending for families, pensioners and the poor and attack economic liberals from a left-wing perspective. Now, you tell me this is how the far right and these European nationalists are described when it comes to people like Sargon, who cheer on these people and basically say, oh yeah, they're for leaving the EU. They're not. And things like here, who, again, you would support in theory, but I don't trust them coming from a far-right mouthpiece. You know, it's how they've gotten where they are, because most of these countries have opted to go for austerity. Why? Not because the EU imposed it on them. It was because most of these countries, at the time of taking office, had right-leaning governments who basically saw, well, we need to make spending cuts rather than make investments, as any of the other countries that have gotten out of the 2008 economic crash early did. Because I'm using my country as an example. We have such short-sighted politicians that they only think of short-term goals as an idea. They do not believe in long-term planning or solutions or investing in projects that would take a long term to actually have an effect. They're more interested in short-term wins, and that is a massive problem we have in our country. Where were we? So here we are. Unlike Trump, who imposes protectionist tariffs on China, the European authorities seek Chinese investment and welcome Chinese imports as a way to provide cheaper goods and clothes for their voter base. Again, it said it very clearly. European politics, massively different. And a lot of people who are championing on this do not understand this, that European politics can be vastly different in every different country. And as I've said before, just because someone is a Eurosceptic in France, Germany, Poland, Hungary or Austria, does not necessarily mean they support leaving the European Union. And finally, Trump can hardly bear to be polite to the quote-unquote Queen of Europe, Angela Merkel. The European populists are more respectful and value the political cover that Merkel's European People's Party, the centre-right grouping in the European Parliament, provides for their attacks on democracy and free media. Bannon, who arrives in Europe with the promise of dollars from US billionaires who indulge in hard-right politics as a hobby, is an exotic figure. But Europe's nationalist identity politics is not English-speaking, which might explain the lukewarm reception he has received so far. Europe's illiberal populists share little of the Trump worldview, and other than Brussels bashing, they have very little in common with each other. Even if much of their rhetoric would have won cheers in the European Communist Party in a political generation ago, herding cats will be easier than bringing all the European political movement into line, let alone following one leader such as Trump and a discard like Bannon. And that's the truth. That is why, even though, yes, the right and these right populist parties are worrying, they aren't going to last. They do not have the collective steam to pass. For example, take what's happened in Italy recently. The Five Star Movement is virulently against massive public project works. But what has happened in Italy recently, you've just had the Genoa bridge collapse. Now, their opponents have been saying Italy needs massive investment works. It needs all this stuff that will help us get our economy going. But you have the far-right five-star movement basically saying that's a waste of time, that's useless, it's not going to work. When there are multiple examples of different countries doing this and it working. And now the five-star movement has sort of painted themselves into a corner, because here they are, and a public works project, a public bridge, collapsing under their watch, when they are saying investing in public works projects is a waste of time and useless. Do you think their popularity is going to suffer? I think it will. I think they will quickly change their tune on investing in public works projects if they haven't done so already. But there you go. That's the reality of what's happening in Europe. It's a mixed bag of different political parties and political ideas that do not really, that sound like they share the ideas, the same ideas, but in practice they don't. Remember, you had the Vienna-Rome axis that we talked about earlier, that was basically designed to stop refugees going into the Alps or reaching, Austria. These two far-right parties who are in power couldn't even agree on basics to get that sorted out. So, yeah, that's the state of Europe, really. I think that article is spot on, and I'll leave a link down to it below. But that is spot on in really representing what these far-right European parties really are. They aren't very organised. They aren't really, at the end of the day, really populist. They're only saying populist things because it's popular to say, and it gets them votes. But at the end of the day, a lot of their policies and rhetoric will be what hangs them in the end.